I do social behavioral research in gene therapy that is outside of HIV, but I'm not going to talk to you about that today. I'm going to talk about work we've done in a particular cohort, and I need this one. Okay, so I broke my community slide into two. I think my talk will be fairly intuitive, but I have a prelim and an exit slide. So what were we aiming to do here? We were intending to understand how people make decisions about joining risky early phase research studies. We were specifically nested within a set of cure remission trials, which I will show you a bit about in a moment. And why is this important? We were actually invited by the investigators to nest our study within their series of trials because this kind of research can really be helpful in informing a whole bunch of downstream targets, including trial design, protocol burden, the informed consent process, how people are retained or not in clinical trials, and their well-being during and after the trials. So these are the kinds of things we're interested in informing for these researchers and for other researchers down the road. Okay. So a little intro to some of the ethical concerns. You're probably well aware of these, but I'll do a quick overview. In the context of remission trials, there are a lot of questions about whether these kinds of studies are acceptable. Are they ethically acceptable? So on a societal level, those questions are important, but we do not address those questions in our research. We're really focused on the community and the individual level. So if these kinds of research studies are done, what are the impacts on communities and what are the impacts of communities on how people perceive and experience these trials? We're very interested in the individual level as well. So how people can make informed and voluntary choice, for example, especially in the context of very complex trials where there is an unfavorable benefit-risk ratio. We are taking people off of ART. Our goal here then is to advance thinking on that community and individual level. We do that through empirical data collection. We also do ethical deliberations. We have philosophers who work with our group. And we also have a community engagement component that I'm not going to discuss today, but I'm happy to talk about later. We are nested within, like I said, a series of clinical trials that are run through Search 010. And this is a cohort of individuals in Thailand that were diagnosed during the acute phase of infection and were treated very early. And so this is a very specific cohort and a very specific trial context. The large majority of these individuals are male and MSM. They're quite young. Average age is 26, and they are treated at on average 19 days of infection. So they're treated very quickly. There have been 4 trials that have occurred within this cohort, and I'm not going to go into details on any of them, but they're all, the first one, 411, is actually just treatment interruption. The other 3 are all different experimental agents. They all include an ATI. I will ask you to note that the restart criteria is actually, these are brief ATIs, so it's viral load of 1,000, and so we're not talking about an extended ATI here. So our approach in the social science group has been to conduct surveys and interviews, and our interview component is mostly what I'm going to talk about today. We do serial longitudinal interviews in individuals, so we interview both people who join, who participate in the trials, and people who decline. And I'm going to focus mostly on the joiners today. We've interviewed 54 people who joined these 4 trials. For people who joined the trials, we interview them 3 times, one when they first make their decision, one at a middle point, and that, because all of these trials have failed, has been when they rebounded, except for 2 people who had not rebounded, and we do a final interview at the end of the trial. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the major findings that we have, and then talk about some of what we think are the implications for future work, for future clinical trials. Again, remember the context. These are individuals who were diagnosed in the acute phase, and these are individuals who are Thai and predominantly MSM, so we have a very specific cohort. So one of the things that we found interesting was that people perceived the going off their ART as a benefit. We had been thinking about that primarily as a potential harm, very worried about people's well-being and their health during that. And uniformly, individuals who participated and people who declined said, man, that sounds like a great thing. I would love to be able to take a break from an ART, but I want to do it in a very controlled environment where someone is really watching me, and I want to know when to go back on. So these were individuals who really wanted to test their body in a controlled environment. They were very optimistic about personal benefits, and they were very optimistic about this leading to better treatments. And they talked about cure in terms of a functional cure, right? So they moderated their expectations in that way, but optimistic about the outcomes of these trials. They had a lot of hope for contribution to science, so that altruism that you expect to see in people who participate in clinical trials, and had this strong feeling of reciprocity, so giving back. I'm going to give back to other people, I'm going to give back to the cohort, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So I'm going to, it is hard to see over here. I'm going to see if I can read this quote to you without turning my back to everyone. But this is just a quote from one of the participants about that idea of altruism. And it's, this research is done for the future. It's done for other people. I wanted to give good things back to society. So these are things that investigators are very used to hearing. What about the risk component? All right. Folks were aware of trial-related risks, so they understood the risk associated with the treatment interruption and the study drugs, although they really focused on the treatment interruption component much more than the risk of the experimental agent. They had a very high degree of trust in the investigators within this search cohort. They had been part of this cohort already. They were recruited by people they knew and trusted. They had a very high degree of belief that the risk mitigation that these investigators had in place would keep them safe. They had a good understanding of trial processes, and they report that they had enough information and made informed and reasonable decisions about whether to join. So another quote, I wanted to stop the drug. I wanted to know, the same as the staff wants to know, how it will be if we stop the drug. Will the virus increase? How long will it take to increase? 1 or 2 years? There's an expression of that optimism there. But this idea of this knowledge, that this knowledge was valuable to them, even if there was not necessarily a benefit from the study drug. So what were their experiences? Again, I'm focused not on the decliners, I'm focused on the joiners here. What happened to them during the course of these trials? We did find very consistent data over these 4 trials, right? People really liked the treatment interruption. It made them feel very normal. We had a lot of discussion about even not having to have an alarm on their clock and being able to go out and join their friends. It really changed their quality of life. But for some, there was a lot more worry than they expected. They really worried about it. And a couple of people actually requested to go back on ART before they actually met criteria because they were so nervous about their own health. So there was more worry. There were no challenges with restarting ART. One of the things we worry about is that people will be so enamored with this experience of treatment interruption that they will not want to restart, and we did not have that experience in this trial. These individuals were diagnosed so early that some of them were FEBIG1 and actually were not detectable on routine HIV testing. And during the course of this trial, because they had viral rebound, they actually changed their FEBIG status and were now detectable on HIV testing. In Thailand, that's a social harm. Even though officially it's illegal, it is routinely HIV tests are done before you can get a new job. And so there were people who perceived that they had a significant social harm because of participating in this trial. There's a quote from an individual who said he was shocked. I didn't know what I should do. I walked around like I lost my mind for a whole day, but now I'm okay. So I had come to terms with it over time. There were variable reaction to the failed trials. So all of these trials failed to meet the primary outcome, although several of them had some good trends toward some positive results, but they had failed. And so there was variable reaction to being in a trial that failed, but more specifically to having a failed body. People use that term, I failed. It wasn't just a trial fail, I failed, because I could not maintain my viral load without ART, and so there is this sort of internalization of the trial failure. And yet overall, people had very high decision satisfaction, and we asked them, would you do this again? And all but 2 of them said yes. Okay, so they remained very happy with their decision and satisfied with the decision, even though there were negative outcomes. This is, you kind of will see this very well. We also collected quantitative data. This is an example of our decision conflict. This is a score that is measured very routinely in studies like ours. And what we found was that people's happiness with their decision basically did not change over the course of the trials. And interestingly, what we see is that decliners had higher conflict, were more conflicted than people who actually joined the trials. So people felt bad about saying no. So in conclusion, a couple of conclusions. We found some interesting complexities about recruiting through cohorts. People did perceive that they had the ability to decline or withdraw. There's a quote of an individual saying, "I walked in here by myself, I made the decision by myself. They didn't force me, I can withdraw whenever I want." But we did have a couple of people say they felt pressured to participate. They felt like the trial team asked them too many times and in too intrusive a way, and they said they felt like they perceived some pressure. Many people said that the ongoing relationships with the investigators in this cohort influenced their decisions in some way. They did not perceive them, most of them, to be a negative way, but there definitely was influence. So we had things like people saying, it's like payback to the study. This trial team has been so good to me, I'm paying them back, which is a bit concerning. We also found that knowledge required for informed choice may be facilitated by cohort participation. These people are very well informed, and some of that was they had this long-term engagement with the investigators. Related to motivations, the hope for personal benefits are unlikely. It reflects a lot of optimism. It raises concern about trial retention. We did not have that issue here, but if people come in with very high expectations that are not met, you start to be concerned that they will withdraw from the study. The altruistic motivations, while appealing on the surface, have deeper concerns about the stigma, especially in this culture. There's this Thai Buddhist culture of merit-making and feeling like you have to atone. So the altruistic motivations are things we're working on a bit more. But the motivation of mutual benefit, which we heard a lot, we're both going to benefit, I'm going to benefit, and the study team is less concerning. So our ongoing efforts, we're looking a lot more at this idea of people's perception, that internalization of rebound. We're working on community reports, recommendations to investigators. We're developing decision support tools. We're collecting this information so we can do something with it and extending our work to other populations. Right now, we're analyzing data from the NOVA cohort from Amsterdam. And so in summary for the community, our key findings, most people felt well informed, but we did find some worries based on expectations, motivations, worry about their own health long-term and cohort-based recruitment. We hope this is going to help investigators figure out ways to help people make good voluntary choices, and we're excited about using our data to actually inform empirically some interventions that might help people long-term making these good choices. So with that, I will acknowledge my colleagues and the search team who have been so wonderful about allowing us to nest the study within their study. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take 1 or 2 questions.
So Holly,
Yes.
question. Would you expand more about what the personal benefits were actually articulated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many people focus their idea of personal benefit around the possibility that they would be able to remain off of drug. And so for many people, that was not, again, they were talking more about a functional cure. So maybe I'll be able to stay off for a while and just get sort of boosters. You know, they're interested in this idea of having something that did not require them to take medication on a regular basis. So if they could hold off for a while from being on their ART, or if the drug longer term, even if it wasn't a cure, if it would allow them to go for long periods of time without taking drug, those were the kinds of benefits people were looking at. They did not, most of them did not say, I am going to be cured from this study.
So basically more of a control approach, perhaps.
Yes.
Interesting. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, then thank you
Thank
very
you.
much again.